I received a number of review copies of games for the purposes of making this video, including one of the most beloved German children's games from Zoch Verlag, Zickezacke Hunekacke or Chicken Cha-Cha-Cha. Memory games make up a sizable portion of the family board game and party game markets, and memory mechanisms feature in many strategic games for adults. So in this video I'm going to delve deep into the genre and explore the most frequently seen mechanisms used in this family of games. In Chicken Cha-Cha-Cha, on your turn you can move forward by looking at the image on the space in front of you and then flipping a central tile face up to make a matching pair. Now if you fail, your turn ends, but if you succeed, you can keep flipping tiles until you fail to make a match. If you move ahead of another chicken, you steal its tail feathers, and the game ends when one player has collected all the feathers, winning the game. This is a variation on one of the most popular traditional memory games, the game of pairs. In the standard game, a selection of cards are laid out face down in a grid, and on your turn you have to flip a pair of cards face up. If they match, you keep them, and if they don't match, you flip them face down again and try to remember where each item is placed for future turns. Pairs can be played with a standard deck of playing cards, or you can purchase any one of thousands of packaged versions with appealing images for children. But as with Chicken Cha-Cha-Cha, there are many other boxed games which use the traditional game of pairs as their foundation, but build on it, mixing in other mechanisms and adding variety. Rainer Knizia is the most prolific and well-known game designer in the board game industry. He's famous for his strategic masterpieces, Modern Art, Ra, Samurai, and Tigris and Euphrates. But one fact you may not know about Knizia: he sure makes a lot of memory games. You'll be hearing Dr. Knizia's name time and again on this list. One such game is Zoch Verlag's Da kommt der Wurm raus. Apologies for the pronunciation. In this game, 6 worms sit on a wormhole tile. A 7th wormhole remains empty, and on your turn you turn over a flower tile and then attempt to reveal a matching colour on the base of one of the worms. If you are correct, you keep the flower for scoring. Either way, right or wrong, the worm moves into a new position on the empty wormhole, so your job is to keep track of the movement of the different coloured bases. This is a very simple variation on the pairs game, but as with many of Knizia's titles, one tiny alteration makes a big difference to the feel of the game. Turtle Splash sees players flicking a wooden disc down a cardboard slope, aiming to land it in the centre of the pool, and depending on where you land, you get to flip over 1, 2 or 3 animal tiles. The aim of the game is to flip over the correct animal tiles in the order shown on your unique player board. And whenever you flip a tile which corresponds to the next animal on your board, you can advance your marker 1 space. If you don't find any corresponding animals, you gain a rubber ring, which allows you to flip an extra tile on your next turn. All tiles are flipped face down again at the end of your turn, so you need to memorise the positions of the various animals, and of course your opponents will be watching and remembering too. The game ends when one player reaches the end of all 3 tracks on their player board, winning the game. Now Turtle Splash is essentially the game of pairs plus something else, a flicking game. To play the game well, you need 2 skills, memory and dexterity. Enchanted Forest uses a similar trick, combining the game of pairs with a roll and move mechanism. So players move around the board, peeking under trees to memorise the images beneath. When they find the item required at the centre of the board, they travel to the castle and claim their reward. To add an extra layer of strategy, Gigamons takes a different approach. It's a very traditional game of pairs, but the effect of each specific pair is different. On your turn, you flip the 2 tiles face up, and if they're different, you flip them back face down, but if they're the same, you take the tiles and put them in front of you, and then use the tiles' power. Now the effects are a mix of take that and more positive abilities. So when you match 2 Floramons, you can collect a tile from the stack. When you match 2 Pyramons, you can destroy another player's tile. When you match 2 Hydramons, everybody else at the table closes their eyes and you can peek at 4 of the face-down tiles in play. And when you match 2 Aeramons, you can swap one of your tiles with one belonging to another player. When you have 3 identical tiles, you gain the corresponding Gigamon, and when the draw pile is empty, the player with the most Gigamons wins the game. And you can also win instantly if you ever have 3 Gigamons. Memoir, with 3 R's, is similar to Gigamons in that each revealed card has a specific effect. The penguin lets you peek at a card, the crab lets you take another turn, and so on. But the twist in this game is the way in which you make pairs. So on your turn you reveal a single card, and each card has two features to consider, the animal and the landscape. Now each card that you reveal must match either of these features, i.e. you can match the animal or you can match the landscape. Now if you fail, you're eliminated from the round, and the last player remaining at the end of each round claims a reward. Closely related to the games of matching pairs is this little subgenre of games where you also turn over two cards and attempt to find a specific pair, but the cards you reveal do not have to be matching. The cards revealed will have a distinct effect, but that effect will be different depending on the specific combination. So in Reiner Knizia's tiny card game Gold, on your turn you flip over two cards, and the goal is to partner up specific items. So for example, if you flip over a gold digger and some gold, the player whose colour matches the revealed gold digger will claim the gold, so long as the digger shows a higher number than the gold does. If you reveal two gold diggers, then the lower numbered digger is removed from the game. And if you flip dynamite, both revealed cards are removed. When there are only 10 cards remaining, the gold rush begins, and players take turns flipping only a single card in the hope of finding gold. And when all cards have been taken or removed, the player with the most gold wins. Panic Island is a real-time cooperative game where you attempt to save natives, dodos and eggs from a perilous island. On your turn you reveal two cards. Natives save dodos, and dodos save eggs. So if you reveal a combination of these cards in a matching colour, the saved card is set aside. These are worth points. Revealing an obstacle has a chaotic effect, so players swap seats or play in silence or rest their chins on the table as they play. If you locate a canoe and a paddle, you escape the island. If you reveal a volcano, you lose. The game is played under time pressure, so you have 2 minutes to get off the island, and only then can you total your collective score. Reiner Knizia's Alles Tomata is another memory game where players are constantly under time pressure, but unlike the cooperative Panic Island, Alles Tomata is a competitive game where players race to recall what item was placed where before their opponents. 7 coloured cards are laid in a row, an item is revealed and then placed face down beneath each colour, and on each turn a new card is revealed from the deck. And all players must race to call out the item which is face down beneath the matching colour. The first player to call out the correct answer takes the card for scoring, and the newly revealed card is now placed face down in its place. When the deck runs out, the player with most cards wins. In Panic Island and Alles Tomata, players are racing their opponents or the clock to recall the hidden items from the display. Now some games do exactly the opposite, putting players under time pressure to memorise the items in the first place. So in Pika Mouse, a family of mice have stolen a load of your stuff and gathered it together in their tiny home. Players drop a handful of tokens into the cardboard house, then shake it up to move them around the rooms, and a small light is placed into the roof and switched on. But it only remains on for 30 seconds, during which time players must peek through the windows and memorise the location of various items. When the lights go out, the players must cooperatively answer a series of questions. Was the button in the same room as the strawberry? Which items were in the bedroom? Was the key blue or yellow? Players score points for the correct answers, and after 4 rounds, they total their score. Magic Rabbit is another cooperative game played under time pressure. Rabbits numbered 1 to 9 are shuffled and placed face down. Matching hats, also numbered 1 to 9, are shuffled and placed on top of the rabbits face up. And finally, doves are placed on top of a few of the piles. The 2.5 minute timer is flipped and the players start taking turns in silence. You're not allowed to talk to the other players around the table. And everybody's working together to place rabbits and hats in their correct positions in ascending numerical order from 1 to 9. And on your turn you can do one action. Either peek at the rabbit beneath a hat, or swap the position of 2 hats, or swap the position of 2 piles, hat and rabbit together. The doves block you from doing any of these things, but at the end of your turn, you are allowed to move 1 dove to a new position. And that's it. When the time runs out, you flip over the tiles and you see how you've done. We're all familiar with the classic magician's trick, where they place a ball beneath a cup and then rapidly switch the cups back and forth, challenging the observer to track the movement of the ball, and when everything comes to a standstill, declare under which cup they think the ball is hiding. As in Magic Rabbit, the tracking of hidden items as they're manipulated by the players is a good foundation for an engaging memory game. And in its purest form, once again we turn to Reiner Knizia to show us how it's done. In Bee Alert, the location of 6 coloured bees is memorised by the players, and they're then placed beneath 6 identical beehives. On your turn, you reveal a card, and if it shows a bee, you must lift a beehive and reveal the matching coloured bee. If you're correct, you slide the beehive in front of you. And if the card shows a bear, then you must return one of your beehives to the centre of the table. Of course, you're not limited to lifting beehives at the centre of the table. You can lift and steal hives from in front of other players. So the hives and the bees beneath them shift around the table as the game progresses. And the first player with 4 hives in front of them wins. In That's Not a Hat, all players start with a known item in front of them, and throughout the game new items will be added to their collection. On your turn you pass one of your items face down to a neighbouring player without looking at it and declare what the item is. If the player agrees with your statement, they accept the gift, and it's now their turn to pass a card. If they think you're wrong, they decline the gift and reveal the card. If they're correct and you were indeed wrong, you take the card as a penalty. But if they're wrong and you were right, they take the penalty instead. When one player takes their 3rd penalty card, the game ends and the player with fewest penalties wins. In Train Sylvania, each player has 4 monsters illustrated on the base of 4 wooden seats. And at the start of the game, you don't know which seat is which. But on your turn, you play a card from your hand, which will allow you to add a monster to the train, move the train 1, 2 or 3 spaces, remove a monster from the train, or change the order of the monsters on the train. And you can only check the identity of your own monsters when they're at a station. The goal of the game is to get 3 of your 4 monsters to their home station. Burg Appenzell, also known as Chateau Roquefort, has a lavish presentation, but at its core it's still a game of tracking resources which are hidden, moved and sporadically revealed throughout the game. So players are attempting to collect 4 different types of cheese by standing 2 of their mice on matching cheese tiles. Once per turn, a player may choose to push a tile into the grid, shifting all the other tiles in that row or column. Alternatively, you can move a mouse, bring a new mouse into a tower, or remove a roof to reveal the tiles beneath. But the roofs are replaced at the end of your turn unless the room is occupied by a mouse, so you're going to need to remember which cheeses were located where. Finally, you mustn't ignore the traps. A shifting row of tiles could send your mice plummeting into a pit. And if 3 of your mice are lost in this way, you're out of the game. In Spooky Stairs, on your turn you roll a die and move your pawn that many spaces, racing to get to the end of the track before the other players. However, if you roll a ghost, you can swap a playing piece with a ghost, which has a corresponding colour marked on its base, but it can't be identified once it's on the board. If your piece has been replaced by a ghost, whenever you roll a number, you move any ghost of your choice, so there's a big memory element to the game which offsets the randomness of the dice rolling. If you roll a ghost, but all of the ghosts are already in play, then you swap the positions of 2 ghost pieces on the board, further confusing the picture. And when playing the variant for older players, if you roll a ghost, you can even swap the player colours, making the game state even harder to track. The moving cups principle is the core of some more substantial strategy games too, such as Stratego, where the values of the playing pieces are only revealed when a battle occurs and then become hidden once again. Goblet resembles a simple game of Connect 4 played on a compact 4x4 grid. On your turn you may place a new playing piece on the board or move an existing piece from the board into a new position. But the twist is that moving a piece might allow you to cover a smaller piece belonging to your opponent. And of course that means that on a later turn you might lift a piece from the board, accidentally revealing a smaller piece hiding beneath, and that might be just the piece that your opponent needs to create a line of 4. For many young children, their first experience of a memory game will be the game of pairs. But I recall my earliest experience was with a different game. My friend's mum would entertain us by placing a bunch of household items on a tray and challenging us to memorise them. She would cover the items with a tea towel and remove one item while we looked away. When she revealed the items again, we'd have to declare which item she had removed. This activity forms the basis of the game Legend of the Wendigo. A memory game is substantially easier if every item in the general pool of items you're expected to memorise is very distinct, as with our tray of household items. But if many of the items look very similar, then things get a lot tougher. The challenge in Legend of the Wendigo comes from the close resemblance of the various scout tokens. Their uniforms are broadly similar, but the hat, the hairstyle, the scarf, the height, and the expression of each scout does differ. And at the start of the game, one player secretly hides among the scouts a single token with an evil spirit on the reverse, known as the Wendigo. The scout players study the location and appearance of the tokens for 45 seconds and then close their eyes. And the evil player removes one token and replaces it with the Wendigo. The other players open their eyes and try to locate the evil spirit. If they do so, they win. If the Wendigo manages to remove 5 scouts in turn without detection, then the Wendigo wins. In Deja Vu, a number of objects are spread out on the table. As in Legend of the Wendigo, a similar colour palette is used across the objects, so many look similar at a glance. One by one, cards are turned over from the deck with images of the items on the table, and when you think you've seen an object arise for a second time, you race to grab that object before the other players. If you're right, you score a point. If you're wrong, it will become clear when the corresponding card is revealed later in the round and you're eliminated from the round with 0 points. Observing, counting, and remembering quantities of items added or removed from a stack can form the basis for a memory game. So in Mia London, you're tasked with identifying a criminal from a series of characteristics: their hat, their glasses, their moustache, their bow tie. For each accessory, there's a deck of cards, and each card features twice in the deck, except for the accessory belonging to the criminal. That accessory only features once. Cards are revealed, and your job is to spot the accessory which only featured once. After doing this, for hats, glasses, moustaches, and bow ties, you form your photo fit of the culprit, and the most accurate wins the game. A decade before he became the farming man with the release of Agricola, Uwe Rosenberg was known for his small card games, and the memory game Mamma Mia was one of the first and most popular. Playing as a group of competitive pizza makers, you start the game with 6 ingredient cards and 1 order. And throughout the game, you place ingredients into the central oven pile and draw new ingredients and orders into your hand. On your turn, you place any number of matching ingredients. If you think that all the necessary ingredients are in the pile, you can place an order card in there too. And each order indicates the ingredients which are required and has a coloured back corresponding to the player who placed it. When the deck runs out, the cards from the oven are revealed in sequence, and if orders have been completed accurately, they're given to their owners as victory points. Now, trick-taking describes a family of card games where players run through a deck of cards competing to win more hands than their opponents, or in the case of The Crew, playing cooperatively in an attempt to win a specified number of tricks. A strong memory will help a player to do well in such games, along with many other traditional card games. The skill here is remembering which cards have already been played and hence are not going to show up in future hands or tricks. In Bis 20, players collectively count to 20, calling out one number each in sequence. And every time they achieve this, a new task is added. The first task is a reversal of 2 numbers. So in this example, you reverse the 3 and the 16, counting 1, 2, 16, 4, 5, and so on. All subsequent tasks are randomly drawn from a deck. So for example, this task means instead of saying 7, you have to wave your hand. Each new task covers all previous tasks, but they remain in play. You just have to remember what they were. So for example, instead of saying 4, you might have to show the number on your fingers. Or instead of saying 12, you stand up. 1, 2, 16, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. If you make a mistake, you lose a gemstone, and when all gemstones are gone, the players collectively lose the game. The Magic Labyrinth is a modern classic children's game from Drei Magierspiele. Players race to collect items from a grid, but the twist here is that there are invisible walls that players' wizards must not cross. Each wizard has a ball bearing attached beneath the board by magnets, and when the wizard moves, the ball bearing moves with it. Beneath the board is a maze of wooden walls which the players can't see. So if the wizard moves through the corresponding space above the board, the ball bearing is knocked off their base with a loud click. And when this happens, you're sent back home. So the Magic Labyrinth is rare among memory games in that you have to remember a specific pattern, the location of invisible walls, and the directions required to navigate the maze. So while strategic adult players often declare their intense dislike for memory mechanisms, there are actually a surprising number of very popular strategy games which do indeed feature memory prominently. These games fall outside of the scope of this video somewhat, but they certainly warrant a brief mention, so I've grouped them together into this final category and I'll discuss a few examples. Witness is a cooperative deduction game for exactly 4 players, no more, no less. And each player has their own book which provides some information about a crime. The players whisper their information to another player who has to combine that information with what they already know. They then whisper all the information to another player, and so on until all the information has been shared. Of course, details get forgotten or misunderstood along the way, which can be really funny, and this is where the game starts to shine. And at the end of each round, a book of questions is consulted and players are tasked with solving details of the crime. There are 64 cases to solve. A strong memory will stand a player in good stead when playing social deduction games. In these games, everyone's working together, but there's a traitor or multiple traitors in their midst. The ability to remember who said what or who did what earlier in these chaotic games will make a player far more effective when the accusations and negotiations start to flow. In a cooperative card game, Hanabi, players are attempting to collect 5 correctly sequenced sets of cards in 5 different colours. And each player has their own hand of cards, but importantly they can't see their own cards, only those of the other players. On their turn, players give each other information about the cards in their hands. So for example, pointing at 2 cards and announcing that these cards are their only green cards. Or, this is the only card with a value of 5. Or alternatively, a player can discard a card from their hand and draw a new one from the deck. Finally, a player may reveal a card from their hand, and if possible, add it to one of the sequences at the centre of the table. To complete the task, players need to remember the information they've been given and the information which has already been offered to other players in order that they don't duplicate that information and waste their turn. And finally, any strategic game with hidden, trackable information deserves a mention. So this generally means games where a player gains resources of some sort, and that resource is fully visible to the other players, but the resource is then hidden behind a player screen or flipped face down. So other players could track the resources possessed by their opponents if they have a good memory, but they can't check the resources once hidden. These mechanisms are not covered in more detail here because memory is not the core mechanism of the game. Indeed, you could ignore the memory aspect altogether and still play such a game perfectly competently, though you might not win if your opponents are more focused on memorising the game than you are. So let's sum up. If you want to design a memory game, here are a few questions you might ask yourself. Is your game competitive or cooperative? Is it played under time pressure? And if so, are the players given limited time to remember items, or recall items, or both? Do your players race against the clock, or do they race against each other? And is your game based around the traditional game of pairs? If so, how can you make your game distinct? Is there one central display of cards or tiles to recall, or does each player have their own individual display? What additional mechanisms and features have you added to the gameplay? Flicking? Roll and move? A hand of cards? Are players searching for matching pairs, or could they create combinations with the different items they reveal? What are the effects of each revealed set? Is your game based around the moving cups principle, with items covered and uncovered, shifting from one location to another, and players trying to keep track? What are they trying to remember? The location of specific items? The quantity of specific items which have been revealed? A sequence of some sort? A hidden pattern or layout? Or perhaps players are trying to recall what has changed from one round to the next. Could you make your game more challenging by making different items closely resemble each other? Is memory the core of your game, the central mechanism, or does it feature as one element of a much larger strategy game? And of course, the job of the designer is to weave these elements together in a new and exciting manner. And if you're looking to develop your own skills as a designer, this next video might help.